In the heart of the savannah, where the grass bent in waves like an ocean of gold beneath the whispering wind, stood a village unlike any other. This village was known far and wide as the Village of Lamps, a place where every household, no matter how poor or wealthy, carried the same sacred duty. Each family possessed a lamp, carefully handed down from generation to generation, its flame never allowed to die. These were no ordinary lamps. They were said to hold the spirit of protection, the warmth of ancestors, and the bridge between the living and those who had crossed into the unseen world. To let a lamp go out was considered a tragedy, a severing of the bond with one's lineage, and so each family guarded their flame as fiercely as they guarded their children. When the sun sank below the horizon and the world was swallowed by night, the village glowed like a constellation fallen to earth. The flickering lamps lined the narrow dirt pathways, shimmered in clay windows, and burned before shrines where offerings of food and drink were left for the spirits. The elders taught that the light of the lamps kept away wandering shadows and spirits of ill will, while also welcoming the guidance of those who had loved them in life. At every birth, marriage, and funeral, lamps were lifted high so the ancestors could see the path of the living. For the people of the village, light was more than survival, it was life itself. Among these lamps, however, there was one that outshone all others. It belonged to a young woman named Ao, whose name itself meant joy. Ao's lamp was not different in shape or size from the others. It was made of the same clay, decorated with the same carved patterns passed down by artisans, but its flame burned with an intensity that made it seem alive. While other lamps flickered gently, Ao's flame danced brightly even when no wind stirred, its glow stretching farther than the others, casting warmth into the night like a sun captured in a vessel. Children often followed her when she walked through the village, marveling at how the shadows around her seemed to soften, as if even darkness bent to her light. Many elders whispered that her lamp had been touched by the ancestors themselves. They said that when Ao was born, her cry had been accompanied by a sudden flare in her family's flame, a sign that the spirits had marked her life for something beyond ordinary. Some said she had inherited her grandmother's spirit, a woman once known as a healer and guide. Others believed the flame carried a guardian spirit that walked with her wherever she went. Whatever the truth, no one could deny that her lamp shone more fiercely, and with it came both admiration and unease. The villagers adored her for the light she carried. She was the first they called upon when hunters were delayed returning from the forest, for her lamp lit the paths better than any torch. Mothers brought sick children to her doorstep, believing her glow would chase away fevers. Old men with failing eyes sat near her in the evenings, claiming her lamp made the world clearer to them. Ao accepted these moments with humility, never boasting of the gift she had been given, only sharing the warmth of her flame as if it belonged not just to her but to everyone. But not all hearts were filled with admiration. Jealousy simmered quietly among those whose lamps burned dimmer. Some believed Ao's light was a trick, that she must have tampered with the oil or sought secret knowledge from forbidden spirits. Others simply resented the way the villagers whispered her name with reverence, as if she were more than human. In a place where every family treasured their lamp as sacred, to see one flame outshine the rest was both a wonder and a threat. And though Ao did not yet know it, her radiant lamp had already drawn the eyes of those who wished to see it dimmed forever. Ao's lamp was unlike any the village had ever seen. While other flames dimmed with time, requiring oil to be refilled again and again, her flame never seemed to weaken. No matter how long it burned, it remained steady, vibrant, and full of life, as though it drew its strength from something far beyond the clay vessel or the oil within. Some villagers said it was the breath of the ancestors themselves that kept it alive, others whispered it was a spirit of fire bound to her at birth, but to all it was clear, this flame was not of ordinary origin. It became a symbol of who Ao was, unyielding, resilient, and destined for a path none around her could quite imagine. From the time she was young, the lamp had accompanied her in moments that seemed to prove its mystical power. Hunters returning late from the forest would ask her to walk with them, her flame lighting the tangled undergrowth better than any torch. She would walk at the front, and no creature dared attack, for even the hyenas that circled at a distance seemed unsettled by her glow. Some said they had seen the reflection of her flame in the eyes of a lion one night, and instead of lunging, the beast had slunk away into the trees, as though bowing to the power it could not challenge. For the sick, her lamp carried hope. Mothers whose children burned with fevers begged her to bring the light near. She would sit quietly by their bedsides, and though she had no herbs or charms to offer, many swore the flame soothed the children's cries, their breathing easing as the soft glow settled over them. Ao never claimed the flame healed them, but people whispered that no illness could endure long in its warmth. Elders said her lamp reminded the sick of life, and that was medicine enough. In times of fear, when shadows seemed to stretch too long and whispers haunted the night wind, the villagers turned to her. During storms that shook the huts and sent lamps quivering, Ao's light never faltered. Neighbors would come out into the rain just to catch sight of her glow, to reassure themselves that the flame was still alive, still strong, and that they too would endure whatever trial passed over them. Her presence became a quiet promise, that as long as her flame burned, no darkness could truly swallow the village whole. Yet admiration often walks hand in hand with envy. Some began to mutter in the corners of the marketplace that she was too favored by the ancestors, that such a gift could not be natural. Others resented how quickly the villagers sought her out, leaving their own lamps forgotten, their own names overshadowed by hers. It was not fair, they thought, that one young woman could carry a flame brighter than all others. Ao, in her innocence, did not see the cold glances that followed her when she turned her back, nor hear the bitterness that crept into certain voices when her name was spoken. She believed, perhaps too purely, that light shared freely would inspire others. But envy does not fade in the presence of light. It deepens like shadows gathering just beyond the glow. Her lamp, admired and cherished by so many, was becoming more than a flame. It was a symbol, one she carried without knowing the burden it placed upon her shoulders. For though the flame never weakened, there were those among the villagers who began to dream of a day when it might finally be extinguished, if only to prove that even Ao's light could be broken. In a village where every family's pride was tied to the sacred lamp glowing at their hearth, Ao's light had become both a blessing and a burden. Her flame was admired, yes, but admiration has a way of twisting into something darker in the hearts of those who feel overshadowed. At first, the whispers against her were faint, carried only in hushed voices behind closed doors. But slowly, envy spread like creeping vines, tangling itself in the minds of those who could not stand to see her flame shine brighter than their own. Among the most bitter of them was her stepmother, Idaea, a woman whose own lamp had always burned faintly. She had married Ao's father after the death of her mother and had never hidden her discontent with the shadow cast upon her by her stepdaughter's brilliance. Where villagers praised Ao, they looked at Idaea with polite indifference and nothing stung her more. She told herself that the girl's glow was a trick, that she had deceived everyone with her false innocence. Each night as Ao's lamp lit their hut more warmly than any oil should allow, Idaea's resentment grew sharper, like a thorn lodged deep in her chest. There were also elders in the village, men who had long considered themselves the keepers of wisdom and tradition. For years their voices had guided the people, but now, whenever there was trouble, villagers sought Ao. Ask the girl with the flame, they would say. Her light will know the way. It made the elders feel small, as though their authority was being quietly stolen by one who had no right to it. Around council fires, they began to murmur that the flame was dangerous, that no good could come from one lamp rising above the rest. It is not balance, they insisted. And imbalance always brings ruin. Even among her peers, girls who once played with her, young men who once teased her, jealousy festered. Where once they had laughed with her, now they laughed at her. Do you think she feeds the flame her pride? They would joke when she walked by, though their voices dipped the moment she turned her gaze upon them. The boys who sought her attention were mocked for being bewitched by her unnatural glow. The girls whispered that she believed herself chosen, superior, too good to be like the rest of them. These whispers might have been harmless if left alone, but envy is never content with words. Small acts of sabotage began. Ao's clay oil jars were sometimes found overturned in the night, their contents wasted on the ground. On market days her goods were shifted aside so fewer buyers noticed them. Once, when she carried her lamp through the path that led to the river, a stone was thrown from the shadows, shattering the pot she held for water. Though her lamp remained untouched, she heard the snickers of children, or perhaps grown men hiding behind children's mischief, drifting on the wind. Ao endured these cruelties in silence, refusing to believe that her own people could wish her harm. But the truth was clear to those who watched closely. Her growing influence had frightened the very people who should have celebrated her. The more the villagers leaned upon her flame, the more those with dimmer lights felt their own power slipping away. It was not simply that they envied her glow, they feared what it meant. If her lamp could shine brighter, could it not also render their flames meaningless? Could it not prove that their ancestors had favored her and abandoned them? In the corners of night gatherings, plans began to form. Idaea was often at the center, her words dripping with venom disguised as concern. The girl is too proud, she would say softly. Her lamp blinds us all. What happens if it goes out? Will she not fall like the rest of us? Perhaps it is time she learns she is no different. The elders, too, nodded in grim agreement, convincing themselves that it was not envy but wisdom guiding them. Even some of the younger ones, eager to rise above her, whispered of ways to bring her low. The belief settled among them like a dark seed. Without her lamp, Ao was nothing. She would be stripped of her influence, revealed as an ordinary girl, perhaps even humiliated enough to retreat into obscurity. They told themselves this was justice, balance restored. But beneath those justifications throbbed the raw, ugly truth. They wanted her flame extinguished not because it harmed them, but because it reminded them of the dimness of their own. And so, night after night, as Ao's lamp glowed faithfully by her side, the hatred of her rivals grew. Their whispers became vows, their glances sharpened into daggers, and the thought of her downfall began to burn hotter than any flame in the village. The night of the gathering came beneath a sky heavy with stars. The air was warm, humming with the sound of drums and the murmur of villagers gathering in the great circle at the center of the village. It was a night meant for celebration, a festival of remembrance when families raised their lamps high to honor the ancestors. Flames glowed in every hand, the paths between huts glittering like rivers of fire as people moved toward the central fire pit. Laughter carried on the wind, the scent of roasted maize and palm wine filling the air. But hidden beneath the music and chatter, a darker rhythm beat, one of envy, of malice, of a plan waiting to unfold. Ao entered the circle carrying her lamp, its glow brighter than ever against the backdrop of hundreds of flickering lights. As she stepped forward, faces turned toward her, and whispers rippled through the crowd. Children pointed with awe, elders watched with a mix of reverence and unease, and her enemies narrowed their eyes at the flame that refused to dim. Even without intending it, Ao's presence commanded the space, her lamp casting long beams across the ground as though her ancestors themselves walked beside her. She smiled gently at the people, her heart filled with gratitude, not knowing that tonight her gift would be tested. The music slowed, the drumming softening as villagers lifted their lamps skyward, murmuring prayers to those who had walked before them. Ao raised hers too, her flame stretching taller than the others, reaching as if it longed to touch the heavens. It was then that the moment of betrayal came. Out of the shadows stepped Idaea, her stepmother, flanked by two of the village elders and several younger men whose faces were twisted with cruel amusement. Their lamps were held low, their flames dim compared to hers, and yet they walked with the confidence of those who had prepared for this moment. "Look at her," Idaea's voice rang out, sharp as a blade slicing the night. "Look how she lifts her lamp higher than all of us, as if she alone carries the blessing of the ancestors. Do you not see her pride? Do you not see how she blinds us with her false light?" The crowd shifted uneasily. Some muttered in disagreement, others nodded, cowed by the presence of the elders at her side. Ao lowered her lamp slightly, her brow furrowing, but before she could speak, one of the young men lunged forward. With a swift, deliberate motion, he struck the clay vessel from her hands. The world seemed to hold its breath. The lamp fell, spinning in the air before shattering against the hard-packed earth. For a heartbeat, the flame held on, flickering wildly in the shards of clay. Then, with a cruel gust of wind stirred by the movement of many feet, it sputtered and went out. Gasps filled the circle. Children clutched their mothers, elders raised their hands to their mouths. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, broken only by the sound of Ao's sharp inhale as she stared at the fragments of what had been her sacred lamp. Her heart thundered in her chest, her eyes wide in disbelief. It felt as though something inside her had been smashed along with the clay, as if her very connection to the ancestors had been severed in that instant. Then came the laughter. Cruel, biting, mocking. Idaea's voice rose above it all, triumphant. "See? She is nothing without her lamp. Nothing but an ordinary girl who deceived us all with a flame she did not earn. Where are her ancestors now? Where is her strength?" Her words slithered into the silence, feeding the doubt already taking root in the villagers' minds. Ao knelt on the ground, her hands trembling as she reached for the broken shards. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision as she clutched the pieces to her chest. She wanted to speak, to cry out that her flame was real, that she had never sought to outshine anyone, but her throat locked, her voice stolen by grief. All around her, lamps still burned, but their glow felt distant, cold. Her own light, her gift, her symbol, her bond, lay shattered at her feet. Some villagers turned away, unable to watch the cruelty of the scene. Others whispered uneasily, torn between sympathy and fear. But the voices of her enemies rang loudest. The young men jeered, their laughter echoing like jackals circling wounded prey. One kicked at a shard of her lamp, sending it skittering into the dirt. "Where is your power now, Ao?" he mocked. "Without your lamp you are like the rest of us. Less even. Perhaps the ancestors have abandoned you." Idia stepped closer, her shadow falling over Ao's bent form. "This is what happens when pride grows too strong," she said, her tone cold, though her eyes glittered with satisfaction. "The ancestors will not be mocked by a girl who thought herself chosen. Let her be humbled before us all." Ao pressed her forehead against the shards, her tears dripping into the dust. For the first time in her life she felt utterly alone, as though the warmth of the ancestors had slipped from her grasp. Around her the villagers' silence deepened, thick with confusion, fear and sorrow. Some wanted to rush to her side, but the authority of the elders held them back. They stood frozen, watching her pain, their own lamps trembling in their hands. The night that should have been filled with song and celebration had become a spectacle of cruelty. Ao's enemies stood tall, convinced they had stripped her of everything that made her special. The mocking laughter rang in her ears, the darkness pressed closer, and her heart ached with the weight of despair. It felt like the end, not just of her lamp, but of her hope, her place in the village, her very destiny. And as the shards of clay cooled in the dust, Ao believed, if only for a moment, that her light had truly been extinguished forever. For a long, breathless moment, all seemed lost. The shards of Ao's lamp lay scattered on the earth, dull and lifeless, and the mocking laughter of her enemies rang sharp in her ears. But just as despair threatened to crush her spirit completely, something stirred among the fragments. A thin wisp of light trembled in the dust, fragile yet unyielding, like the last ember of a dying fire refusing to surrender. The villagers gasped as the ember pulsed, then flared, rising slowly into the air as though invisible hands had cupped it gently and lifted it free from the shattered clay. The laughter stopped. Even the drums, which had continued in hesitant beats, fell silent. All eyes fixed on the impossible sight before them. The flame that should have died danced above the ground, no longer bound to a vessel. It flickered as if alive, stretching, shrinking, and curling into shapes that seemed almost human. For an instant, some swore it took the form of a hand reaching toward Ao. Others whispered that they saw the faces of the ancestors reflected in its glow. Ao lifted her tear-streaked face and gasped, her heart pounding with both awe and fear. She felt warmth wash over her, not from the fire itself but from within, as though something deep in her soul recognized the flame. It was not gone. It was not broken. It was alive, more alive than it had ever been, free of the clay that once contained it. The flame swayed above her as if studying her, as if deciding what to do next. Then, with a sudden, graceful twist, it hovered close to her cheek, brushing her skin with a warmth that made her tears dry instantly. She felt a whisper against her ear, though no sound was truly spoken. It was not words, but a presence, the unmistakable call of her ancestors. The villagers gasped again as the flame rose higher, casting long shadows that danced wildly across the gathering circle. Lamps flickered in response, bowing to the flame's brilliance. A murmur swept through the crowd, fear, awe, confusion. "It is a spirit," someone whispered. "It is the ancestors themselves." But before anyone could move, the flame twisted once more, turning toward the dark line of the forest that bordered the village. Without hesitation, it darted forward, streaking like a firebird into the shadows of the trees. Ao's breath caught in her chest. Though the night was deep and the forest loomed ominous, she did not hesitate. Every fiber of her being told her that the flame was calling her, guiding her, asking her to follow where it led. The villagers watched as she rose to her feet, her hands still trembling but her eyes alight with determination. She stepped away from the shattered lamp, her gaze fixed on the trail of light flickering at the forest's edge. Her enemies cried out in confusion, their triumph slipping from their faces. "Stay where you are," Idia hissed, her voice sharp with panic. But Ao did not even glance at her. The pull of the flame was stronger than fear, stronger than shame, stronger than any human voice. Around her, villagers whispered in awe, their fear of the darkness momentarily overcome by the sight of her courage. "She follows the ancestors," one elder murmured, trembling. "They have chosen her." Without another word, Ao stepped into the shadows of the trees. The flame darted ahead, pausing only long enough to ensure she followed, then weaving deeper into the forest's depths. The drums of the gathering were left behind, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the call of night birds. The village, with its lights and its judgments, faded from her view. Ahead stretched only darkness, except for the flame burning like a star fallen to earth, lighting a path that no one else could see. The night was heavy with silence after the flame broke free from the shattered lamp, its light weaving into the air like a living thing. Ao followed it, her heart pounding in both fear and awe. Each step carried her further from the familiar paths of her village and deeper into lands whispered about in hushed tones. The forest loomed ahead, its trees casting shadows so thick they seemed alive. Yet the flame hovered before her, its glow soft but sure, painting a path through the suffocating dark. She stepped into the unknown, her bare feet brushing over roots and stones, guided by a light that seemed to know where it was leading. The forest was not welcoming. The night sounds of insects, owls, and unseen creatures pressed against her ears. Branches creaked like voices speaking secrets she was not meant to hear. At times she thought she saw shapes moving between the trees, hunters with sharp eyes, or perhaps spirits cloaked in shadow. Her chest tightened, but every time doubt threatened to slow her steps, the flame flickered brighter as if to remind her that she was not alone. The memory of the villagers' laughter still clung to her heart, but here in the forest, their voices were replaced by something older and far more powerful. The first trial came when she reached a river, wide and fast-moving under the moon's pale gaze. The water roared like a living beast, churning white against jagged rocks. Ao hesitated on the bank, her legs trembling. Crossing it seemed impossible. But then the flame dipped low, hovering just above the surface of the river, and the water shimmered strangely beneath its glow. Stones hidden beneath the waves revealed themselves, just enough for her to step across. She moved carefully, her arms outstretched for balance, each step a prayer whispered to her ancestors. Halfway through, a slip nearly pulled her into the rushing current, but the flame steadied above her, its glow calming her fear. Breathless, she reached the far bank, her body drenched in sweat though she had not fallen in. Beyond the river, the path rose into rocky cliffs. The climb was steep, jagged edges scraping her palms and soles as she tried to follow the glowing light. The wind howled through the stones, carrying with it cruel voices that echoed her deepest doubts. "You are weak. You are nothing without your lamp. You will fall." For a moment, her grip faltered, and she pressed her forehead against the stone, tears pricking her eyes. But when she lifted her head, the flames circled above her, as though urging her upward. Its glow filled her chest with warmth, a reminder that the lamp had not given her light, the light had always chosen her. With grit she did not know she possessed, she pushed herself higher until she reached the top, where the stars stretched wide like a crown above her. Her journey pressed deeper into shadowed woods where illusions waited. At first she thought she saw her mother, smiling at her from behind a tree, beckoning her to rest. Ao's heart ached, her steps slowing as she reached toward the vision. But when her fingers brushed against the figure, it vanished into smoke, leaving behind the bitter taste of deceit. Other phantoms followed, her enemies mocking her, the villagers turning their backs, the shattered lamp lying in pieces at her feet. The weight of despair nearly crushed her, and for a heartbeat she thought of turning back. But the flame flared suddenly, driving away the illusions. Its glow bathed her face, showing her that the lies were only shadows with no true power. She exhaled, grounding herself once more in the fire's steady presence. Wild animals prowled the path as well. Eyes gleamed from the underbrush, and snarls echoed between the trees. At one point, a leopard padded onto her path, its muscles rippling, teeth bared. Ao froze, her body rigid with fear. But the flame floated forward, hanging between her and the predator. To her astonishment, the leopard's eyes softened, and it lowered its head as if in respect. Then it slunk back into the dark, leaving her unharmed. It was then she understood. The flame was not merely guiding her, it was protecting her. It carried the will of her ancestors, a force that even beasts of the wild recognized. As she pressed onward, exhaustion gnawed at her. Her legs felt like lead, her throat burned with thirst, and her spirit wavered. Yet every time she thought she could go no further, the flame pulsed with light, wrapping her in a strength she had not known she possessed. It was as if each flicker carried whispers of courage from generations past. Her grandmother's voice seemed to ride upon the flame's breath, urging her to rise, to keep moving, to believe. Step by step, through river, cliff, and forest, Ao followed where the flame led. And though the path was riddled with shadows and trials, she began to sense that each danger was not meant to break her but to reveal the fire within her own soul. By the time she reached the forest's deepest heart, her fear had shifted into something else, resolve. The flame had lit more than the path ahead. It had lit the truth inside her, a truth that no shattered lamp could ever destroy. The cave was vast and shrouded in shadows, its entrance framed by jagged rocks that seemed to breathe with the night. The flame hovered at the threshold for a moment, flickering as though it waited for Ao to gather her courage before stepping inside. She hesitated, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on her chest, but something deeper pulled her forward. The cave was not simply a hollow of stone, it felt alive as though every wall, every crevice, every grain of dust remembered the passage of countless souls before her. She stepped inside, and the sound of her feet echoed like a drumbeat, announcing her presence to whatever dwelled within. As she moved deeper, the air grew cooler, yet the flame before her burned brighter, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. The shadows seemed to stretch and shift, taking on the shapes of figures, warriors with spears, mothers holding children, elders with wise eyes. She blinked, wondering if her tired mind was deceiving her, but the whispers that followed confirmed it was no illusion. The air hummed with voices, some soft as wind brushing against leaves, others thunderous like distant storms. They called her name, not once, not twice, but over and over, each voice belonging to a different tongue, a different age, a different soul. Ao's knees trembled as she pressed a hand to her chest, her heart racing in rhythm with the echoes. "Who are you?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. "We are the ones before you," the voices replied, their tones weaving together into a chorus that reverberated through her bones. "We are the lamp keepers, the guardians of light, the protectors of balance. The flame is not bound to glass or oil, it is bound to the spirit, and now it burns within you." Her breath caught. All her life she had thought of the lamp as a fragile object, a vessel of tradition, a symbol that must be protected at all costs. Yet here, in this cavern of whispers and shadows, she learned the truth. The lamp was nothing without the one chosen to carry its fire. The flame was eternal, but it needed a soul to nurture it, to guide it, to wield it against the encroaching darkness. She closed her eyes, letting the whispers wash over her. They told her the stories of her people, their triumphs, their tragedies, their resilience. She saw visions in her mind's eye, villages rising from the earth, fields flourishing under the blessing of the flame, warriors standing firm against shadows that sought to devour them. She saw ancestors carrying the flame across rivers and deserts, protecting it through wars and storms, never allowing it to fade. And now that duty rested on her shoulders. Tears slid down her cheeks, though she did not feel sorrow. It was reverence, the kind that humbled her spirit yet filled her with strength. She understood now that her path had never been accidental. She had been guided to this place not because she was strong, but because she was willing to listen, to trust, to walk forward even when afraid. The flame pulsed before her, as though agreeing with her thoughts. Its light bathed her face, warm and alive, and the whispers grew softer, as if they knew she had heard enough. One final voice, deeper than the rest, echoed in the cavern. "Carry us forward, Ao. Carry us not in your hands but in your soul. For the world will need you." When the voices faded, the cave fell silent, yet Ao no longer felt alone. She rose, wiping her tears, her back straightened, her breath steady. The flame floated ahead once more, waiting for her to follow, its glow stronger than before. She stepped out of the cave with newfound clarity, the weight of history now afire inside her chest, knowing her journey had only just begun. The ancestors' voices deepened within the cave, and the flame hovered before her like a silent witness. When Ao stepped forward, the ground beneath her shifted, revealing a long path glowing red with heat. It was a bed of burning coals stretching further than her eyes could see. Her heart pounded, but the flame did not waver. She clenched her fists and reminded herself that this was not about her skin or her body, it was about her spirit. With each step, the pain bit at her feet, but she noticed something strange. The fire did not consume her. Instead, it wrapped around her like a cloak, making her stronger with every stride. By the time she crossed the coals, her breath was heavy, her legs trembling, yet she felt taller, as if the flame inside her had grown. But the ancestors were not finished. As she entered the next chamber of the cave, shadows curled from the walls and gathered into shapes she recognized, faces from her past. She saw her rivals, sneering, their hands smashing her lamp. She saw her village, some looking on with pity, others turning away. Then came visions that pierced deeper, her mother's disappointed gaze, her father's silence, and a younger version of herself, cowering in fear of being forgotten. The voices hissed, "You are weak. You are unworthy. You will never rise." Ao's knees buckled under the weight of these visions, but the flame darted before her, breaking through the darkness. It whispered without words, reminding her that courage was not the absence of fear but the will to step forward despite it. She straightened, lifted her chin, and faced the illusions. "I am not afraid of you," she said. And just like smoke caught by the wind, the visions faded into nothingness. The final trial was the fiercest. The ancestors placed a bowl of fire into her hands, its heat so fierce she could feel it burning her palms even as she held it. She was told to carry it across a bridge of stone high above a raging storm. Thunder rolled, winds howled, and rain slashed across her skin, trying to extinguish the fire she bore. The storm mocked her, each gust threatening to throw her off balance. Her arms shook, her grip faltered, and there were moments she thought the fire would die. But then, as lightning split the sky, she remembered her journey, the forest she had crossed, the animals she had faced, the whispers of the ancestors, and the flame that had never abandoned her. She screamed into the storm, not in fear but in defiance, and took another step. Then another. Each step grew surer than the last. By the time she reached the other side, the bowl of fire blazed brighter than before, untouched by wind or rain. When she set the bowl down, the cave filled with light so strong it erased every shadow. The voices of the ancestors swelled like 1,000 drums, no longer testing her but praising her. They told her that the flame she carried was never about the fragile lamp that had been broken. Glass could shatter but spirit endured. Fire could be struck down, but it could not be killed if it lived within the soul. Her rivals had tried to destroy her by smashing the lamp, but they had only freed the flame that was meant to awaken her. Ao stood in the glow, her chest rising with steady breath, her body scarred from the trials but her spirit unshaken. She realized then that the true flame was not something she followed. It was something she had always carried inside her, waiting for the right moment to ignite. The air around her felt different as she stepped out of the cave. The once restless flame that had darted like a wild bird was now calm, rooted deep within her chest. It burned brightly but without consuming her, its warmth spreading through her veins, filling her with a strength that was not of flesh or bone, but of spirit. Her skin seemed touched by light, and when her eyes opened, they mirrored the fire that now lived within her. She carried no lamp in her hands, yet every step she took illuminated the world as though she herself was the vessel of eternal light. The trees bent their branches as she passed, their leaves shimmering as if kissed by embers. The forest, which had always loomed over her with a mix of mystery and menace, now seemed to bow in reverence. The ground beneath her feet pulsed with life, no longer cold or indifferent but humming in recognition of her transformation. The winds that once carried whispers of doubt now curled around her like companions, soft voices calling her name as though eager to remind her that she belonged to both earth and sky. She moved forward without fear, her heart steady, her steps guided not by sight but by the flame within. The animals of the forest gathered at a distance, eyes wide with curiosity and awe. Birds that once scattered at her approach now perched on branches above, their songs weaving into a chorus that seemed to celebrate her rebirth. Even the silence of the cave, which had weighed heavy on her shoulders, lifted, replaced by a symphony of life acknowledging the arrival of someone new, someone chosen. For the first time, Ao understood that she was never meant to guard the flame as an external treasure. It had always been meant to awaken within her, to reveal the strength that cruelty and loss could not extinguish. Her rivals thought they had shattered her when they smashed the lamp, but their cruelty had only stripped away what was unnecessary, leaving her to discover the indestructible truth. The flame was not in glass nor in oil, but in the core of her very being. She paused at a clearing where sunlight streamed down, yet the brightness of day seemed pale compared to the glow radiating from her. Villagers who had followed at a distance, drawn by rumor and curiosity, stopped in their tracks when they saw her. Some gasped, others fell to their knees, unsure whether to fear or revere her. They saw no lamp in her hands, yet light rippled outward as though the very air bent around her presence. Her eyes, fierce and steady, carried the fire of generations, the living memory of the lamp keepers. Whispers spread like wildfire. She carries the flame without a lamp. The old ones muttered among themselves, realizing prophecy had taken form before their eyes. Children peeked from behind their mothers, sensing in her a guardian, not a threat. Even those who once mocked her, those who had laughed when her lamp was shattered, felt the weight of shame pressing down upon them. For the truth was undeniable. While they had tried to break her, she had emerged brighter than ever, untouchable. Ao lifted her gaze to the horizon, where shadows of night would soon return. But she did not fear the darkness anymore. Where once she clutched desperately at a fragile lamp, now she knew she carried within her a flame that no hand could destroy, no storm could extinguish, and no cruelty could diminish. The world might bend and break, but the fire within her would rise again and again. And as she walked forward, the earth seemed to open a path, the forest bowed low, and the winds, carrying the voices of her ancestors, whispered her name, Ao, the bearer of the eternal flame, When Ao stepped back into the village, the air itself seemed to pause. The people who had once mocked her, who had whispered that she would never return, now stood frozen as her figure emerged at the edge of the gathering grounds. She carried no lamp in her hands, no fragile vessel of clay or glass, yet her presence glowed with a brilliance more steady than any flame they had ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly as though kissed by embers, and her eyes carried a quiet fire that could not be denied. The murmurs began at once, hushed voices questioning if she was even mortal anymore, or if she had become one with the spirits of flame. Mothers pulled their children closer, not out of fear but out of reverence, as if they did not want the sacred moment to slip away. Her rivals, the very ones who had smashed her lamp with laughter in their voices and cruelty in their eyes, were the first to feel the sting of her return. They had built their power on her supposed failure, boasting that they had rid the village of a weak dreamer who thought fire belonged to her. But now, confronted by Ao's radiance, their boasts withered into silence. Their eyes darted nervously, searching for the shattered lamp that should have left her powerless, and when they found none, their trembling grew worse. They realized with dawning horror that the flame they had tried to kill was never in the lamp at all. It had been within her spirit, growing stronger with every trial she endured. The villagers gathered closer, their faces lit not by firewood or torches, but by the glow that radiated from Ao's chest. It was as though the flame itself had chosen her as its vessel, and the people could see the truth with their own eyes. The elders who had once dismissed her stood in silence, ashamed of their doubt. Children whispered her name with wide eyes, as if they were speaking a prayer. Every lie told against her, every cruel rumor meant to bury her, now crumbled under the weight of the undeniable light she carried. Her rivals tried to speak, their voices trembling as they scrambled to defend themselves, but their words rang hollow. "She deceives you," one of them shouted, though even he did not believe his own claim. Another stepped forward, insisting she had used tricks or forbidden magic, but the fire in Ao's gaze burned through his lies. The villagers who had once been quick to follow these false leaders, now saw them for what they truly were, cowards who had tried to destroy what they could not understand. Their power melted like wax before Ao's flame, leaving them exposed and pitiful. Ao did not need to raise her voice. She stood calmly, letting the truth of her presence speak louder than any accusation. "You broke what was never yours," she said softly, her words carrying across the silent crowd. "You thought the flame lived in glass and clay. But the flame does not belong to hands that smash. It belongs to the spirit that carries it." Her words struck deep, not just at her rivals, but at every villager who had once doubted her. Many lowered their heads, ashamed, but they also felt a rising hope, for they now understood that the flame she bore was not for her alone. It was a light meant for them as well. The forest winds stirred as if to bear witness, circling through the village and carrying the scent of smoke and renewal. Even the ground beneath their feet seemed to hum with recognition. Ao's enemies could not withstand the truth any longer. One by one, their voices faltered, and their bodies bent, as if the weight of their own cowardice pressed down upon them. They had tried to kill the light, but instead they had made it stronger. That night, no torches were lit in the village, yet no one sat in darkness. Ao's flame, shining from within her, illuminated every face, every home, every corner where fear once lurked. And as the people looked upon her, they knew that she had returned not only for herself, but to bring them a truth they had forgotten. No cruelty, no lies, no breaking hands could ever destroy the fire of a spirit that refused to be extinguished. The silence that followed Ao's words was heavier than any punishment she could have delivered. Her enemies, who once believed that breaking her lamp meant breaking her spirit, now stood exposed before the entire village. Their trembling bodies revealed their guilt, their cowardice laid bare by the glow that radiated from her. Yet Ao did not raise her hand against them, nor did she let anger poison her heart. Instead she chose a different path. She looked at them with eyes full of fire and yet softened by compassion, and she said, "You can break a lamp, but not the flame of the spirit." The words carried through the crowd like a chant, like a truth that had been waiting to be spoken aloud. The villagers, young and old, repeated it under their breath as if engraving it into their souls. Her enemies could not meet her gaze, for in her light, their shadows had nowhere to hide. From that day forward, Ao became more than just the girl whose lamp was shattered. She became the new keeper of light, not because she carried an object or a relic, but because she carried a truth that could not be destroyed. Children began to gather around her each evening, their curious eyes wide with wonder as they asked her to tell the story of how the flame had survived. She would kneel among them, her glow casting warmth across their eager faces, and say, "The flame is inside you too. It is not in the clay of a lamp, nor in the oil, nor in the wick. It is in your breath, in your courage, in the choices you make when darkness comes." The children listened with rapt attention, carrying her words like secret treasures into their dreams. Elders too found themselves humbled by her presence. Some remembered the days when they thought wisdom could only be preserved in objects or symbols, forgetting that the truest power comes from within. They came to her not as leaders but as learners, asking her to speak of resilience, of the strength that endures even when the world seems determined to silence it. In the quiet of the nights, when the stars blinked like sparks of a greater flame, they would sit in a circle around her, listening as she spoke of the trials she had faced in the cave, of the flame that wandered free, and of how it returned to her heart. Her voice carried not bitterness but a gentleness that soothed their spirits and rekindled their own strength. The village transformed slowly under her guidance. Where once people feared losing what they depended on, be it lamps, tools, or symbols, they began to look within themselves for endurance. When a child cried in despair after breaking something precious, their parents would remind them of Ao's words, "The object may break, but not your spirit." When neighbors quarreled, they found peace in her teachings, remembering that fire can destroy but it can also warm, and it is choice that determines its path. Even those who had once conspired against her found themselves changed, no longer able to cling to deceit under the weight of her truth. She had not cursed them, but her forgiveness itself became a fire that burned their shame, urging them to live differently. And so, Ao stood each day not with a lamp in her hands, but with a flame in her chest, visible in the way she spoke, the way she smiled, and the way she stood unbroken before the world. Her presence lit the village paths without a single flicker of oil. Her story spread to nearby lands, carried by travelers who had heard of the girl who became light itself. Mothers told their daughters, fathers told their sons, and wandering storytellers carried her tale to villages far away. She was no longer simply a girl who endured cruelty, she was a symbol, a living reminder that resilience was the truest form of light. In every heart she touched, a spark was lit, and together, those sparks grew into something no force could ever extinguish again. They say time softens the edges of every story, but Ao's tale only grew sharper as it traveled. The legend of the woman whose lamp was smashed but whose flame still lit her way spread beyond her village, carried by traders, wanderers, and storytellers who found themselves awed by the truth of her resilience. Villagers who once doubted her spoke with pride, claiming they had witnessed the moment when light without fire filled the square, when shadows trembled in defeat. Children whispered her name with wide eyes, while elders nodded, recognizing in her story the eternal struggle between those who destroy and those who endure. Her flame, they said, was no ordinary fire, it was the spirit of life refusing to be extinguished, a reminder that light is never born from glass or oil alone, but from the strength of the one who carries it within. Soon, travelers from distant places began arriving at the village, asking about the woman whose spirit glowed brighter than any lamp. They wanted to see with their own eyes the one who proved that power did not rest in possessions but in the soul. Many carried their own burdens of despair, hoping to find a spark in her story that could reignite their fading strength. And when they left, they carried with them not just the tale but also a piece of that courage, spreading it further across valleys and rivers, into towns that had never known her name before. The legend became like a living flame itself, passed from one to another, never dying, only growing larger with each telling. Generations later, long after Ao herself was gone, her name was still spoken in the flickering glow of firelight. Mothers told their children about the girl who did not let cruelty define her, about the moment when she stood unbroken even as her enemies thought they had destroyed her. Elders reminded the young that strength is not found in what you hold, but in what you carry within your spirit. And every time storms threatened to darken their lives, they would repeat the words that had become her gift to the world. You can break a lamp but not the flame of the spirit. In time, her story became more than just a memory, it became a lesson etched into the soul of her people. When darkness came, they lit fires not just for warmth, but as symbols of her unbroken flame. Warriors carried the story into battle, believing it would guide their courage. Farmers whispered it while planting seeds, trusting the flame of life hidden beneath the soil. Even kings and chiefs heard of the woman of light and marveled at how a single soul's endurance could ripple across generations. And though centuries passed, the story was never forgotten. For it was no longer only Ao's story, it belonged to all who had ever faced shadows, all who had ever been told they were powerless, and all who discovered as she did that true light comes from within. Thus, the legacy of the unbroken flame lived on, not as smoke or ashes, but as a blazing reminder that when darkness tries to smother light, the flame only grows stronger. It became a story that outlasted time, carried from mouth to mouth, from heart to heart, teaching that resilience is not the absence of hardship but the refusal to let hardship define you. And so, Ao's spirit walked in every fire that burned against the night, in every voice that rose against despair, and in every soul that dared to shine despite the weight of shadows. Hers was no longer the tale of one woman, it was the timeless truth of destiny, courage, and the light that can never be broken.